Makes a huge difference if you'll do me a favor by subscribing and liking the podcast wherever you listen. It goes a long way. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy.
He was this relentless, positive energy, but extremely competitive. And there was no joke cracking or moments of relief. It was relentless. And I'm not sure I've ever seen another athlete like that in my experience. You can't see Michael Phelps, how he looks under the water, how his face looks. But you can certainly sense with Rafa this positive energy, kind of relentless belief in positivity, but it's dead serious. So it's an interesting combination. I mean, you see guys like Connors, Leighton Hewitt.
Yes.
There's like that through the years, incredibly just intense competitors. I think Connors might be the best equivalent to Rafa in many ways. But with Connors, there was a negative undertone there that was driving him at times, a lot of the time. And Hewitt, same. There was an edge to it. Rafa, it was not about me getting back at you. It was about him dealing with himself.
Chris Clarey is an American sports journalist and author who mostly writes about tennis. He reported for the New York Times from 1991 to 2023. His biography of Roger Federer, The Master, was published in 2021 and was a New York Times bestseller. His latest book, The Warrior, Rafael Nadal and His Kingdom of Clay, came out May 13th, 2025. He attended Williams College in Northwest Massachusetts, where he played tennis, soccer, and volleyball. He was a three-sport athlete and received his Bachelor of Arts in English and History. And in this conversation, we talk about Rafael Nadal and what makes him so special, what makes him an amazing champion, his mindset, his mentality, his toughness, his Uncle Tony, that dynamic, his Uncle Tony as his coach throughout his entire professional tennis career, junior and professional tennis career. Chris's experience being there, seeing Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic and these great legendary tennis champions and athletes firsthand, watching them play and just seeing them up close. And I hope you enjoy this amazing conversation with Chris. Awesome. All right. Welcome, Chris.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to see you. So you started following Rafa Nadal pretty much when he came on the tour, right? At 17?
Yep. First article I wrote about Rafa, he won a match in Mallorca. I didn't watch the match, but I was following it. And this is in the pre-internet days. And I talked about how great this prospect was, Rafael Nadal Pereira, because he went by both names, both patronyms at that time. And I said, it's so great to see Richard Gasquet and Nadal Pereira both have these wonderful one-handed backhands. So we could have really used YouTube, back then. Or he could have used more of a clue on my part or more research. But somehow I got that wrong. So I always love telling that story because it makes you realize how, I already knew I was fallible, maybe not quite that fallible, but there you go.
Only one of them stuck with the one-hander. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm figuring he changed it someplace along the way, right? He went from two hands to one, right? On the forehand, went out the backhand too.
Oh my goodness. And so...
Yeah, I saw him for the first time play live at Wimbledon, his first Grand Slam tournament. He'd played the juniors before, but I didn't see him play that year, even though I was there. But I watched him play, out on the outside courts, behind center court. I met Tony and Rafa the same day, and he was, he had recently just turned 17. So that's when I first saw him play.
What was that first meeting like, first experience?
Well, a couple things stand out from that. Yeah. One was just from a distance when you're watching the court. I obviously had heard about Nadal, and obviously I'd screwed up. So I was even more interested, having figured out what he was not, a one-handed backhand. And everybody knew he was going to be good. But we didn't have any real images in our heads before like you would now. Anybody who's that hyped up, you would have watched on social media clips before you see him play. But I'd never seen him play. And just was from a distance, the guy seemed to be a fully grown adult. He was just everywhere, running around in the grass, just exuberant, vamoses and grunts, and just sort of, and then he got up close and you realize his kind of chubby cheeks and baby fat on him. And he kind of didn't look he looked fully formed as an athlete in some ways, but not fully formed as an individual, which is normal for somebody who just turned 17. And but Tony was there, and meeting Tony was extremely polite and happy. And in those days, you could kind of walk up to people, and you didn't have to have everything programmed by the agents and all that sort of stuff. And so Tony and I had a nice chat walking back to the locker room after Rafa won his first round, and I was writing for the New York Times and the Herald Tribune then. And then we interviewed Rafa, a small bunch of us after the match, and he was just, there was no English happening at that point. It was all Spanish. I was living in Spain at the time, and he just seemed like a really, sort of he wasn't a typical teenager, but the answers weren't very long, but you could tell he was really determined to be a very good grass court player. And a lot of the questions already at that point, Wimbledon were around. So you think you could ever play well on grass? And he almost took a little bit of umbrage at that because I think he'd been planning with Tony. And if you go back and look at the earlier interviews, which I did for this book, you see how much he was focused on Wimbledon and the grass from a pretty early age. So that came through in that first interview. I consider that a lot of foreshadowing.
That's amazing. When I started tennis at 6, so this was 1986, I saw Andre Agassi when he was 16. He's 10 years older than me, just turned 55. I saw him play live in Reno, Nevada when I was just getting into the sport, and he won a little local tournament, $5,000 tournament. So I can relate to like that, seeing that teenager, and you're like, whoa, right? Like, it's unbelievable. I was just blown away how good Andre was at 16.
You meant, and good in the sense of just how the ball was coming off the racket off both wings, or what did you, contact points? What did you mean?
Yeah, I mean, he was just bludgeoning the ball. He was just ripping winners on guys that, like, the local college players at Nevada Reno, the tennis pros. I mean, he was just ripping winners left and right by him as a 16-year-old. And I was like, just getting into the sport, I was like, who is this? This kid from Vegas, who is this? So I can relate to that, like the face doesn't look like the man, but the tennis player, it's like pretty accomplished at that age.
And they were both pretty shaggy at that point. Rafa wasn't quite as shaggy as he got a little bit later, but he was pretty shaggy. And Andre, I imagine, was at that point too, right? Pretty, kind of shaggy teenager.
Yeah, exactly. Um, you put in here I love this, like you talk about, you said that Rafa's like Michael Phelps. You said like clay is to Nadal what water is to Michael Phelps
Mm.
in the cover of the book. Can you talk about that? I love that saying.
Rafa might contest that because, ultimately it becomes a little love-hate with the thing that you're so good at. And maybe he would have been happier to be on something a little bit less a part of his DNA. But that's kind of what I mean. I mean, I just feel like the book and the exploration and this book does is kind of Rafa in this natural element. And he's sort of at one with it, the way he moves, the way it gets all over him. Clay does that, obviously. It's sort of, I think, man meets the element, and element kind of makes the man a little bit too. And there's no doubt that Michael Phelps, I covered a lot of Michael Phelps in my days at the New York Times and Herald Tribune, covered a lot of his world championships and Olympics. And the guy is just, with his long limbs and sort of elastic body and just the way he's shaped and just the way he moves in the water, it's like watching a dolphin in the water. It's just, he's born to it. And honestly, watching Rafa play on clay was, for me, very similar. It just seemed like that was what he was meant to be on. That's what he grew up on. You go back and visit his childhood club in Manacor, where he started, and it's just sort of the red clay sprayed on the walls and on the ground. Everything's got this little tint of red, and it's meant to be, just meant to be.
Yeah. And at the same time, like what Rafa accomplished at the French Open, I mean, people didn't think was in the tennis world, didn't think was possible, right? Like similar to Phelps with swimming, it's kind of like, okay, there will never be another Mark Spitz. There won't be these records just shattered. Like, what are your thoughts in that respect?
I mean, Spitz did have the 7 golds, so there was something that was sort of insane that was already out there when Phelps came along to aim for it. But the thing that's so striking about Nadal and Roland Garros and the 14 French Opens is just it wasn't that people didn't think it was possible. They weren't even thinking about it. I mean, it wasn't even discussed. That's the thing. I mean, I remember talking to Feliciano Lopez in the beginning of the book, the first chapter. I talk about this with Feliciano, who really spent a lot of time with Nadal, was a friend of his, and saw him from kind of the beginning of his arrival on the tour. And his coach, Francis Roy, actually ended up being really a very vital coach in the Rafa team as well. So it really knows him well. And he's like, you don't even dream of winning 14 French Opens. And nobody dreams of that. They will now, but nobody would have at the start. So that's kind of the thing. It's such an outlier that it almost just, and watching it year by year as we did, covering it and the fans around the world. And I think even Rafa himself, I don't think, unless you took it year by year, it just didn't make any sense. It was just insane. And that's really the big reason I wanted to write this book this way. I wanted to really dive into this because I feel like, we're having this discussion. We saw it happen, but it still doesn't seem like it could really happen. It just seems crazy, even though Novak got to 10, which is pretty amazing at the Australian Open, for sure. But 14 is 4 more. It's like winning 5 slams versus winning 1. It's just a huge difference. So and I don't think Novak's going to be getting to 11, looks like, at this point. So I just, it's an astounding thing. And it's interesting to hear Rafa. I think the farther he gets from it, the more he's going to be amazed by what he did. And you can already hear him talking about it a few months after retirement, going, well, that is kind of crazy what I managed to pull off. And it only worked because of the mentality that he had, the skill set that you and I talked about already with the clay, the connection with Tony and his other coaches, and just that beautifully cultivated and innate mindset that he had. It's I think Emilio Sanchez Vicario, you probably know him. He called it the perfect storm, and it really is perfect dust storm.
Yeah, and that's high praise coming from him.
Yeah. Emilio knows. He's a coach, and he tried to win one. Couldn't he win one?
Yeah,
14, plus 8, and then Nadal. Great clay quarter beyond compare, but he still won 8 other majors on other surfaces. So he's right there with Agassi and Lendl and all that crew, even if he took all the clay away. So that's how great he was.
You talk about that innate mentality mindset throughout the writing this book, researching, and all the years you spent with him. Can you talk more about that? Like what you think has made him so special to do that year after year after year at such a high level?
It's a great question, and that was essential for me to try to understand that better from doing this. And I guess, like I said, Emilio Sanchez's comment about perfect storm is appropriate. And one of the elements of that was, Tony, his uncle, who's obviously critical to this whole process. Rafa would not be a tennis player without his uncle Tony, because he would have been a soccer player, because everything else was pulling him in that direction, including his uncle Miguel Angel, who was national team star and Barcelona star and Mallorca star, and Rafa loved soccer, and he was great at it. So no Tony, no tennis. That's clear. So Tony, I think probably knowing that, felt the pressure of doing it absolutely right. And he had been coaching long enough to know enough at this point to be able to manage this well. He'd done enough trial and error. And I think he just had a real code that he put in place from the beginning, that he was able to just create from the start. And he was very focused on elements of fun when Rafa was very young. A lot of those games you've heard about that he played where he pretended he was a great soccer star and had all this fabulous stuff around it, or he pretended he could make it rain. And Rafa's like, wow, my uncle. That all went away a little bit later for sure. But early on, there was that element of magic and fantasy to it. And like Uncle Magician, he called him. But I think there was already, when they were in the court doing the work, the code was there. And the code was not just about having fun. It was about taking it seriously from the start and being able to focus not so much on what's across the net, but what's here inside. And I think he created amazing conditions for an athlete to self-actualize and be able to get the best out of himself, because he was in a way competing more against himself than he was against the player across the net. Which sounds simplistic, but you as a coach know that is a really hard thing to embrace and fully embody. And I think Rafa did. But the difference here is Tony, let's face it, coached dozens of kids, scores of kids through his whole time in America. How many of them became great champions? Who knows?
Wow.
So the code is there. Code applies, I'm sure. Very useful in whatever you're doing. But you had to have a personality type like Rafa with a skill set and athleticism like Rafa who could take it and not, burn out, not quit, and accept it. So that's the perfect storm part. That you had these, I think, a unique set of circumstances, truly, with this beautiful code, rigorous, it's stoic at times, but Rafa had the personality in the world today to take it and accept it and embrace it.
Yeah, and that embrace piece, right? Because, like, my goodness, he battled some serious injuries over his career and just kept coming back. Where I remember watching and thinking, okay, like, he might come back, but he won't come back to that level. And then he would exceed that level.
Yep. Eternal drive, good advanced medicine, good recovery. But I don't think we even know the half of it, Chad. I mean, I reported this book. I covered Nadal for 20 years. I don't think we know the half of it, what happened behind the scenes, the things he was dealing with. I mean, Tony's starting to talk about it a little bit more now, about how much pain Rafa played with, how often he had to take painkillers. I mean, what we know is crazy enough. The last French Open that he won with his foot basically numb because of the Muller-Weiss flare-up. That's his most crazy Grand Slam victory. But yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that we don't know that would be even more amazing in terms of what he put up with his body over the years. And that's not a great thing, You as a coach know athletes will play with pain, but I think Rafa played with pain more than the average great athlete did, and probably learned to get used to it. And maybe Tony's code, Tony did not teach Rafa to cruise. He taught him to expect, not just expect, but welcome the adversity that was inevitable on a tennis court. So I guess the pain and physical problems were part of that package. And I only saw Rafa a couple times, at least in public with us in press conferences or interviews, look truly, truly dejected about it. So pretty amazing resilience and spirit there.
Do you think there's lessons, not just the athletes, but all of us can take from that? Like, talk about the resilience, that grit, that internal drive. Like, do you think there's lessons here in your book and from Rafa's example that we can apply in our own lives, just as the regular Joe and Betsy?
I think so. I really do. Yeah, I mean, I think I did the Federer book before this, The Master, and I found a lot of things in that that I could apply to my own miserable little life.
I don't think your life is too
and
miserable.
and and I found more with Rafa, and it's a different sort of lesson set, I suppose. But I think that idea of leaning into the idea of, okay, if you feel it's a lot of pressure, but if you feel you're really you're close to your maximum and your best, giving what you can give within the context that you are given, and are able to honestly sit down at the end of the day and feel good about the effort that you put in and the method, and then you don't succeed, and then you can live with that.
Yeah.
But if you don't do that, and that's your code, and that was Rafa's code, that's what drove him, I think. And he made that very, very clear. And I don't want to talk about the whole book, obviously, because hopefully people are going to read it. But the ending of the book goes in that direction, and it's really interesting. Where he would really try to define it himself, and he was very good at defining it by the end. And I think that was all about that idea of maximizing what you can do, and then you're at peace. But if you don't do that, then you're not going to be at peace, at least if you're Rafa. And I think that's good for all of us. We all have to accept that there's always going to be somebody on a given day or in a given situation in our realm of endeavor who's going to be able to, surpass us, maybe do better. But it really should come from here and your own self-knowledge and awareness. And I think they did an amazing job of creating that sort of mentality and that kind of philosophy. The two of them together, really. And Rafa early on was sort of viewed as Tony's disciple. Probably fair, but in no way should we underestimate Rafa's role in the process too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of, I'm a big fan of John Wooden, the UCLA basketball coach, and he
Yep.
talked a lot about that. Like I have a book here called My Personal Best, um, about I think it was Steve Jameson wrote it, and up on the shelf, and it's that internal scoreboard versus the external scoreboard, where he said like, we could lose for him, we could lose the national championship, but if we gave everything we had to this experience, this journey, then we can lay our heads on the pillow. But
Mm,
if we win the national championship and everybody else is congratulating us, but we didn't really feel like we gave our best, it's actually a failure, a disappointment.
hmm I like that. I mean, I don't believe that Tony Nadal has read John Wooden's book, but it's certainly they would have a lot to talk about, you know, for sure. And I think it's something that's a situation where these things when Rafa says them, I love this Jim Courier I talked to, former number one French Open champion, great TV commentator. Jim just says Rafa has a gift for making the complex seem simple.
Mm.
And these sort of things we're talking about don't sound like they're multi-layered, but being able to really pare it down and live that simplicity is very, very difficult. And you see it in a head game sport like tennis in particular. Basketball's a different dynamic with the team and all the different moving parts. It doesn't depend solely on you. At least the kind of tennis that Rafa played in his era was pretty much on him. I mean, there were the coaching signals and occasional stuff from Tony, but it was pretty much Rafa against, mano a mano out there. It's a very different game now. Changed a lot with the coaching allowed and the big teams and everything. But I think Rafa did have an ability to distill really good, strong messages out of these more complex themes, and he almost made you seem like, what are you so worried about? It's simple. This is how you do it, and that's what Curry was tapping into, and I think he's right about that. That's part of the power of Rafa, was that ability to kind of boil things down and not, despite all the delays and ticks and routines and everything else, ultimately keep it pretty simple with the ball in play, and boy, he did it well. Great pressure player, very seldom choked.
Yes. Yeah, simplification is the highest form of sophistication.
Like that.
Yeah. And
Who said
yeah,
that? You? Was that Chad?
no, no. Pretty much everything I've stolen from you. So no, I steal like an artist from everyone. I don't know. It's an old saying. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's true, right? Like if you look at it like that simplicity, makes me think of Richard Feynman was a physicist teacher at Cornell and Caltech,
Yep.
and his classes, his students, I've read articles about it, and where they said he had this ability to make physics seem so simple, like so understandable. You could just grasp it and eat it like an apple. Whereas so many concepts like that or anything, it can get overwhelming.
hmm Well, you coach this crazy game.
Yeah, a
You
little
coach young
bit.
people, the age Rafa was playing. So what strikes you? What you obviously wanted to talk to me about this. So what strikes you about Rafa? What did you find teachable about him?
Yeah, what I found teachable, yeah, I love that. Your journalism hat on. What I found teachable was his spirit. That like I love, sometimes when I have players and myself getting too nervous, getting worried about the outcome. The thing with Rafa that I always saw was regardless of the score, he would compete for that point in front of him. And it's kind of like what Gino Auriemma, the UConn basketball coach, talks about. I spent some time with him a few years ago, where he would say like, compete for the next possession. I don't care if we're up 50, down 50, scores tied, last possession, first possession. And so I try to use Rafa and others as like an example to the players and even to myself when I was playing. Like, okay, just go out and compete as hard as you can for this moment. And then refresh and do it again, regardless of what is going on in the score or anything else. externally.
Mm-hmm. And how hard was that for your guys to do?
Oh, it's incredibly difficult because twofold. Number one, nowadays, there's a lot more noise, a lot more distraction, so it's easier to overcomplicate than to simplify. And secondly, that takes incredible focus and energy. And so unless you train it, uh, it- you can't just like flip the light switch and turn it on.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a daily process. Like when I was coaching college tennis, it was a daily process to like build up to that. So hopefully by the end of the year, we were doing it to the best of our ability
Mm-hmm.
for as long as we could.
Yeah, I don't know if Rafa settled into that. Certainly not right away. You watch some of the early stuff of him, and he was playing at a much more manic pace, and he learned to slow things down and created the rituals in part, I think, to be able to maximize himself on every play, every point, if you will. That was a big part of it. The routines really centered him. But I think you talk to guys on tour, and the thing that amazes them just as much as Rafa's record, maybe not just as much, but a lot, is the self control, being able to not chuck the racket so rarely. I mean, over 1,000 matches, really lose it. I mean, I saw him get mad at Carlos Ramos. Sorry, Carlos Bernardes, chair umpire, a couple times. They had a thing going back and forth, but it was so rare, and I never saw him throw the racket in a match or in a training session that I saw. And so it's just, I think the players at the top level, knowing the stresses, are just blown away by that.
What do you think allowed him to do that? To have that sense of that mastery of control, that sense of self-control.
I do think it's like I said before. I think it all goes back to that equation of Rafa's inner strengths and natural mentality with Tony's very intentional, carefully inculcated code from just the beginning. I mean, it's all Rafa knew. He started hitting with Tony when he was 3, and really playing with him regularly at 4. So those early connections and the lessons that were imparted, and he had that consistency all the way through. Other people played bigger roles than I realized along the way. I learned that from writing this book. But Tony certainly was the principal person, and I think that's it. I just think it's just so hardwired, and obviously his own parents reinforced that. And he comes from an athlete warrior clan. The Nadals, with his brother. I mean, not his brother. Sorry, his uncles, and even his aunt. Was a very good athlete, and I think that was these are people of successful business people. His grandfather was an orchestra leader and a civic leader in Mallorca, and very respected man in the community. And so I think Rafa grew up with a civic sense and a good value set, and then Tony's monastic code to a degree that he put in place, that all came together. So I think that explains it. But ultimately, we all know kids from our own peer group and kids that we've worked with over the years in different elements who might have a very strict upbringing and rebel against it and go quite the other direction. So something had to be right with Rafa's philosophy inside of himself and own mentality to be able to withstand that and uphold that.
And to me, it also speaks to the relationship. So that understanding, because that understanding of each other and the appreciation for each other, like your coach and the team around you, I think that there had to be, and probably still is, like a deep appreciation for each other versus a resentment.
Mm-hmm. I don't think, I mean, maybe other families are different, but from my sense of this story, I don't think it would have worked if Rafa was coached by Sebastian, his father. It had to be the uncle, and it wouldn't have worked if it was somebody outside the family. So it was just one step removed from the direct line of authority, and that separation was there. And somebody from the outside, I don't think would have had the moral authority or the gravitas within that structure that Rafa grew up with, which is very family based, clan based in Mallorca. Wouldn't have worked. So part of the perfect storm had to be the uncle. Maybe it could have been an aunt, but had to be something like that.
Yeah.
And that respect, carried forward. And also, Rafa knew that his parents were on board, and it was a family project. And ultimately, a decision was made to focus on tennis when he was, 12 years old or so. And around the same time that Federer made the same choice with soccer and tennis. And once he committed, that was, he knew he was giving up a soccer career. I think he would have been a Real Madrid player. I'm almost sure of it. Just looking at the video that we can see of him and how great he was as a youth soccer player. So it was never going to be a lighthearted endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the one thing that's interesting is that you watch Rafa play, even at that 17-year-old in Wimbledon in 2003, the first time, there was nothing light about it. It was this relentless, positive energy, but extremely competitive. And there was no joke cracking or moments of relief. It was relentless. And I'm not sure I've ever seen another athlete like that, in my experience. You can't see Michael Phelps, how he looks under the water, how his face looks. But you can certainly sense with Rafa this positive energy, kind of relentless belief and positivity, but it's dead serious.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting combination. I mean, you see guys like Connors, Leighton Hewitt.
Yes.
Players like that through the years who were incredibly just intense competitors. I think Connors might be the best equivalent to Rafa in many ways. But with Connors, there was a negative undertone there that was driving him at times, a lot of the time. And Hewitt, same. There was an edge to it. Rafa, it was not about me getting back at you. It was about him dealing with himself. And that's what you talked about before, the internal journey. And I think that's really what makes him unique.
Yeah, completely run in his own race.
Correct. That he could never win.
Yeah, exactly.
He accepted that he could never win it.
Uh-huh. How much do you think you've written the Master, which absolutely I've told so many people, hundreds of people, any tennis person I come across that either plays or watches the sport, I'm like, have you read Chris Clarey's The Master? I just absolutely love it.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's incredible. How much do you think from now writing about Rafa and being around both of these guys for 20 years plus, how much do you think it was the perfect storm in them helping each other go to new levels?
It's a good question. Also, I don't want to misrepresent myself. I mean, I'm a journalist. I was not, hanging out with them at the dinner table and following them around on vacation. I dealt with them as a tennis writer and very fortunate to have the access that I did through the New York Times and the Herald Tribune. Wouldn't have had it otherwise. But I was always at a certain distance. I was very lucky and fortunate to be able to have that access to them regularly through their whole careers, which is why I wrote these books. But I mean, there are others within their circle who know a lot more about what really happened behind the scenes than I would. But I do feel like I had a privileged, vantage point for sure within the world of tennis journalism and sort of superstar culture. And for sure, those guys, their relationship was not always, tea and crumpets, man. It was they had their tough moments for sure. They definitely did along the way. A couple times, different phases. Some of it political, the ATP disagreement. Some of it just that early rivalry as Roger was adapting to Rafa's arrival and sort of what he projected on the court and kind of resisting that understandably. And, Rafa feeling a little bit defensive about the way that he was sort of sensing the vibes, or at least within his team. So there was more tension there than people realized and more than I realized. But they really got to a great place, a genuinely great place, I mean, by all that I've been able to observe. And I think it came from a combination of natural affinity over time and also, that great capitalistic trait, enlightened self-interest. It was, this is good. People really are into Rafa and Roger and the rivalry. And we had this amazing Wimbledon final. We had two of them in a row, and people are just diving into it. And we kind of owe it to ourselves and the game. And let's be honest, our brands as well, to be able to really embrace this and work together. And I think in the working together and sort of being constantly connected and having to answer questions about each other for literally, 15 years, all the time, I think they really realized they had a lot in common. And I think they really hammered out really a special relationship for that level of sport and a one-on-one, Martina and Chrissy are a great example on the women's
Yes.
tennis side. Not sure that Rafa and Roger will ever get to that close a place, but that's, I think, for where they were, and they couldn't even communicate early on, really, because Rafa's English was not great, and Roger's Spanish has never been great. So I think, I think they, and in that cooperation, they were able to, I think, compartmentalize a bit and work together. And like the Lever Cup project, Rafa was very supportive of that. It meant a lot to Roger. Roger went down to Rafa's academy and was a big part of the opening there and really lent his star power to that. And then the same thing back and forth. Those seem like small things to us on the outside, but they're pretty big things to those guys. That's sort of how they keep track of the score away from the court. Like, I'll give a little, you give a little, and they did a lot of that. And in terms of their games, there's no question. Roger was probably more open to that suggestion from the outside. Someone like me is like, how much did Rafa make you a better player than Rafa was, because of that internal aspect of Rafa and not wanting to get into the comparison game and really resisting that, kind of because of what had been, taught to him and the way he felt about it. But he would ultimately admit that as well. There's no question that those guys in the bar that they kept resetting gave him something that he was chasing. Maybe he pushed it more inside himself than externally, but no doubt made his internal race all the harder. And I think they learned from each other, and they were adapting their games. I mean, you could see it. I think Rafa probably, Novak too, but Rafa certainly changed his game a lot over time in terms of the service technique and the improvement in the forecourt and the more direct use of the backhand in particular, especially that big cross-court punch that he started to integrate, more in the second half of his career, which was so critical. And I think there's he put a lot of things in place to combat the brilliance of Federer and Djokovic, for sure.
And that adaptation is incredible, right? That consistent refinement, adaptation, that journey of mastery, when you're getting some of the results you want, but like, it seems like that is, in some ways, in some respects, is actually rare of these people, because a lot of people, it seems like some of the tennis players, for example, they don't really mess around too much. They kind of just stick, all right, this is working, and I just make it better or more consistent. Do you agree with that, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked to Djokovic. I mentioned this in the book. I went to Monte Carlo and met with him for a New York Times story back in 2019, and you're talking about the final. It's the end of the season at Wimbledon when he fought off the two match points again against Roger and won the final, and just talking about the way he approached his career, and he says there's no question, from talking to people like Kobe Bryant, who was a big mentor and connector for him. Stagnation is regression. Stagnation is regression. And it applies to many things, but I think, above all, in a sport where you have incremental differences that make all the difference, like Roger in his Dartmouth commencement speech talking about the percentage of points that he won in his career, 52, 53%. And everybody's always kind of blown away by that. Oh, wow, the great Federer, barely won more than half of the points he played. So those guys were well aware of how important the incremental was, and also knew that in their late to mid 30s, they weren't getting any faster. So even more important to improve everything else that you could. So I think they really, at varying degrees in their careers at different times, they all had it fully embraced by the end and midpoints, but I kind of think Rafa had that from the beginning. I think that's sort of the difference, is that he had fully integrated a lot of the concepts that others mentally took longer to embrace or be able to deal with. Novak and Roger in particular, or Murray, if you want. But the actual game styles, I think people were able to adapt. Roger's an incredible tennis chameleon, as you know. And Novak is an underrated tennis chameleon.
Yes, he is.
Brad Stein says, right?
Yeah.
He's, basically, what was his term? He's boringly amazing.
I remember some
I think
of
that's it. Yeah, because it's
yeah,
just like you just don't, you don't really realize what you're seeing until you really understand the game and how the ability that he has to make these shots that he's hitting from these different positions work with the physics and all that.
yes. Gosh, I remember some times on the court in Fresno with Brad Stein when I was a kid.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
one hander, right?
Yeah. I just
I got
remember,
that one right anyway.
yeah, exactly. I just remember him just crushing us physically.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
It was just like these training, they used to have these things, these area training centers, and I played NorCal Juniors. And so I remember we went out and Brad was just like all about the physical fitness. He's like, this worked for Courier, it's gonna work for you kids. I
That's
was like,
tough.
okay, Harry Hopman.
Mhm. Or Tony Nadal. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, we're coming up on time. So where can people find your book, Chris,
Mm.
and follow like your blog, your Substack, things like that? Where do you want people to follow you and your work?
Well, thanks for asking, Chad. No, I mean the book is out. I think all the usual places I would imagine. I mean, you can. I always try to lobby for people to get it at independent bookstores, which I always try to support in the U.S., Canada. But it's coming out in the U.S. May 13th with Grand Central, which is a Hachette imprint, and you can pre-order it now before it comes out, and it'll be waiting for you May 13th when it comes out officially. And if you're in the UK, May 15th. And then I left the New York Times. I covered sports and tennis for them for 30 plus years, just about 30 years, and I left in 23 to write this book on Nadal after I'd written the first one. And I started a newsletter like so many of us have, but mine's called Tennis and Beyond, and it's got a nice little community. We got close to 10,000 subscribers, and it's a got different tiers to it, but it's a nice respectful place with a lot of insight from the readers and subscribers. So, and I will ramp it up now that the book is out there more. I've done sort of different levels of intensity on it, but it's been very gratifying, very very nice to do it, and use the knowledge and use the creativity. And yeah, I'm just going to try to get this book out in the world and talk to people like you and spread the word.
That's great. Yeah, I can't wait to read it because I've enjoyed your writing over the years so much, and I deeply appreciate you making the time to come on and share a few thoughts with me. So
Thank you, Chad. Tennis is a great connector. It really
yeah,
is in many
yeah,
ways.
yeah, it is. It is awesome. Yeah, best of luck in the promotion. I'll as I read it, and I'll be promoting it online with my audience as well, and get this podcast out there and promote it. And yeah, all the best, Chris.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thanks.